At a quiet parish picnic in St Mary Mead, money goes missing from the church donation box. The accusation is made publicly in front of the entire village, and it points straight at the man who was in charge of the box. Everything seems obvious. A careless guardian, an unlocked moment, a simple theft. But here is what you probably missed. Agatha Christie, or in this case, the spirit of her method, gave you every single clue you needed to solve this mystery before Miss Marple revealed the answer. The guilty party was visible from the very first chapter. The motive was hiding in plain sight, and the real crime was never about the money at all. Today, we are going to break down exactly how Miss Marple solved the trouble at the parish picnic, step by step, clue by clue. And I'm going to show you the exact moments where you were deliberately misdirected and what you should have been watching instead. If you enjoy this kind of deep mystery analysis, make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell notification, because we do this regularly with classic detective stories. Now, let us begin with what the story wants you to believe. The story opens with a perfect English scene. A parish picnic, a sunny meadow, elm trees, wicker hampers, cucumber sandwiches. Everything seems pleasant and predictable. And right away, the story introduces you to the key players. Pay attention, because the way each character is introduced is itself a clue. First, there is Mrs. Harriet Pembley. She is described as the practical force behind the entire occasion. She has been on the parish committee for 11 years. She's efficient, organised, almost military in her approach. She's the person managing the event. She's the person with the notebook. Then there is Mr. Gerald Whitton. He's described as perfectly pleasant, and the story makes a point of telling you that nobody can improve upon that description. He is average. He is agreeable. He likes cricket and his sister's fruitcake, and most importantly, he has been given charge of the donation box. Next, Mrs. Clarisse Norwood. She is neat, self-possessed, economical. Her garden is the best kept in her lane. Her household accounts balanced to the penny. She keeps her things where she can see them, and she is wearing a silver brooch shaped like forget-me-nots. Finally, Miss Adelaide Trench, a schoolteacher, precise, exact, the assistant to the parish treasurer. And from the very first moment she appears, the story tells you she looks preoccupied, as though she knows something she has not yet decided whether to reveal. Now, here is the trap. The story is setting you up to suspect Mr. Whitton. He is in charge of the box. He is a bit bumbling. He admits he left the box near Mrs. Norwood's hamper. When the accusation comes, all eyes turn to him. And if you were watching Mrs. Norwood, you might suspect her too. Her hamper was right next to the box. She is described as controlled, guarded, careful. She seems like someone with something to hide. But neither of them did it. And if you were paying attention to two very specific details in the opening chapter, you could already have known that. Let us go back to the moment Mrs. Pembley makes her announcement. It is shortly after 2 o'clock. Luncheon is over. The entire company is gathered and attentive. Now, most readers accept this at face value. A woman discovers money is missing and makes an announcement. It seems natural. It seems urgent. But Miss Marple does not see it that way. She notices something crucial. The timing was chosen. The accusation was made before the lemonade had even been poured, before the afternoon had settled into the relaxed, scattered phase where people drift apart. In other words, Mrs. Pembley chose the earliest moment at which she could still count on having everyone's full attention. Why does that matter? Because genuine outrage does not plan its audience. If you discover money is missing and you are truly shocked, you do not calculate the optimal moment to tell people. You blurt it out. You fumble through it. You're clumsy because the discovery itself has knocked you off balance. Mrs. Pembley was not off balance. She was precise. She was controlled. She had her notebook. She had her figures ready. She had even chosen where to stand. Miss Marple recognizes this immediately. She thinks, and this is one of the most important observations in the entire story, that performed indignation has a texture quite different from the real thing. Genuine indignation stumbles upon itself. It discovers its grievance in the moment. Performed indignation arrives complete, already shaped, already supplied with evidence, already conscious of its audience. This is the first major clue. The accusation was not a reaction. It was a performance, and a performance requires preparation. Now let us talk about the notebook. Mrs. Pemberley keeps meticulous records. During the recount of the donation box contents, which she herself conducts, everything checks out. The numbers match her notebook exactly. The deficit is confirmed. That seems like proof that Mrs. Pemberley is telling the truth, right? The numbers match. Twice. But Miss Marple asks a question that most people would overlook entirely. She asks, what happened to the original record? The first sheet, the one you used when the donations actually came in? And Mrs. Pemberley says it was smudged. She had to copy the figures to a clean page. Stop right there. This is the single most important detail in the entire mystery. The original working sheet, the only document that was created in real time as donations arrived, is gone. It has been replaced by a neat, clean copy that exists entirely on Mrs. Pemberley's authority. A record copied out for clarity after the original has disappeared is a record that asks to be accepted entirely on trust. And trust, as Miss Marple knows, is most readily requested by those who understand that scrutiny would be much less obliging. Think about what this means. If Mrs. Pemberley adjusted even 2 figures downward on the clean copy, small amounts, barely noticeable, the totals would perfectly explain the deficit, and they would point the blame at whoever was standing near the box. The recount proves nothing. It only confirms that the numbers in the notebook are consistent with the money in the box. But if both the notebook and the box have been manipulated by the same person, of course they match. That is not proof of honesty. That is proof of competence. And there is one person who has proof. Miss Trench kept her own independent list. 2 careful records, made by 2 careful women at the same table on the same morning. They do not agree. 2 of the entries are lower in Mrs. Pemberley's version. Both discrepancies operate in the same direction. Both move toward the deficit. The original record is gone. The clean copy is convenient, and the accusation was aimed at someone else entirely. Now, I want to try something. You've heard 2 major clues. You know that the timing of the accusation was calculated, not spontaneous. You know that the original record was destroyed and replaced by a clean copy that cannot be verified. You have seen that an independent second record does not match the official one. So here is my question to you. Right now, before I reveal anything else, who do you think is guilty? And more importantly, why do you think they did it? Pause the video. Write your answer in the comments. Tell me who you suspect and what you think the real motive is. I genuinely want to know, because what you answer will tell me whether the misdirection worked on you or whether you saw through it. Take a moment, think about it. Ready? Let us continue. So if Mrs. Pemberley took the money, and by now I think you can see that she did, the question becomes, why? And why now, after years of managing parish accounts without incident? The story gives you the answer in 2 layers. The surface layer is the brooch. Mrs. Norwood wears a silver brooch shaped like forget-me-nots. It is beautiful. It is old. And it was left to her by Mrs. Pemberley's own mother, Evelyn Pemberley, in the will, directly, bypassing Harriet, the daughter, entirely. Mrs. Pemberley has nursed this grievance for 6 years. 6 years of sitting on the same committee as the woman who wears her mother's brooch. 6 years of managing perfectly well on the surface, while something much less comfortable festers underneath. But resentment alone does not explain the timing. People carry grudges for decades without acting on them. Something must have changed recently. And that something is the deeper layer, the brother. Mrs. Pemberley's brother has debts. He has had them for years. and she has quietly managed them before. But this time the demand was urgent. Someone was not prepared to wait. She needed money before the end of the month, so she took a modest sum from the donation box, intending to replace it quickly before anyone noticed. She had done similar things before on smaller occasions, she admits. It had never attracted notice. But this time, something went wrong. The deficit was discovered, or was about to be discovered, and she could not replace the money in time. And this is where the old grudge became useful. Instead of quietly fixing the problem, Mrs. Pembley saw an opportunity. She could publicly redirect suspicion toward Mr. Whitton, a pleasant bumbling man who had struggled to defend himself, and by proximity toward Mrs. Norwood and her hamper. 2 problems solved with 1 accusation. The missing money gets blamed on someone else, and the woman with the brooch gets publicly embarrassed in front of the village. That is why Miss Marple says the missing money was never the true heart of the matter. It was only the thing on the surface. Beneath the surface lay the real scandal, a 6-year-old wound that finally found its occasion. What makes Miss Marple extraordinary is not that she solves crimes. Lots of detectives do that. What makes her unique is how she solves them. Miss Marple does not look for fingerprints. She does not chase suspects. She does not even leave her chair for most of this story. She sits under an elm tree, knits, and watches people. Her method is observation combined with analogy. She watches how people behave, not what they say, but how they move, where they stand, who they look at, and especially what they do not do. Let me give you 3 examples from this story alone. First, she notices that Mrs. Pembley's indignation is too well organised. Real shock is messy. Mrs. Pembley's announcement is structured. That tells Miss Marple this was planned. Second, she notices that when Miss Trench suggests the deficit might be an arithmetic error, Trench does not look at Mr. Whitton or Mrs. Norwood. She looks at Mrs. Pembley. She's checking a reaction. That tells Miss Marple that Trench already suspects something specific. Third, and this is the subtlest one, she notices that Mrs. Norwood's composure is a shade too composed. A woman whose name has just been drawn into a question of missing money should show some reaction. The fact that Mrs. Norwood shows almost none suggests she has already considered this possibility and prepared herself for it. She knows the accusation is coming because she understands Mrs. Pembley well enough to predict it. Miss Marple also uses what I call the method of parallel placement. She notices that the hamper was placed apart by design. The box was placed beside it by circumstance. Between those 2 facts lies a small space, and it is in such spaces that the truth sits quietly waiting. This is the Miss Marple method in pure form. She doesn't deduce from evidence. She reads from behaviour. She understands people, not as suspects, but as human beings with histories, vanities, grievances, and habits. And that understanding is what leads her to the truth every single time. Before we get to the final summary, I want to talk about someone who does not get nearly enough attention in this story, and who may, in some ways, be the most interesting character of all. Miss Adelaide Trench. Think about her position. She is the assistant to the parish treasurer. She keeps her own records, careful, honest, time-stamped records. And at some point during that afternoon she looks at Mrs. Pembley's notebook and realises the numbers do not match her own. Now, what does she do with that knowledge? Nothing. At least not immediately. She does not stand up and announce the discrepancy. She does not confront Mrs. Pembley. She does not rush to Mr. Whitton's defence. She spends the entire afternoon standing at an intermediate distance from everybody, not aligned with any group, not committed to any position. And I think most people read that as weakness. She is timid. She's afraid to speak. She's a school teacher who cannot handle confrontation outside the classroom. But Miss Marple sees it differently, and I think Miss Marple is right. What Miss Trench is doing is something much harder than speaking out. She is being certain before she acts. She has a piece of evidence that could destroy a woman's reputation. She has numbers that contradict the official record. But she also knows that her list is informal, that Mrs. Pemberley's notebook is the recognised document, and that an accusation made on uncertain ground can damage the accuser just as much as the accused. So she waits, she watches. She holds the paper in her pocket and carries the weight of it alone for hours, and then, when she has thought it through, when she has decided that she trusts her own observations, she brings it not to the vicar, not to the committee, not to the crowd. She brings it to Miss Marple, the one person she believes will understand what she's showing and what it might mean. There is a moment in that conversation where Miss Trench says, "I did not know what to do with it alone," and Miss Marple replies, "You kept it until you found a way of doing something sensible with it." That is a very different thing. I find that exchange deeply important, because it describes a kind of courage that almost never gets celebrated. It is not the courage of the person who charges into battle. It is the courage of the person who waits, who endures the discomfort of knowing something difficult and holds it carefully until the right moment arrives. Miss Marple calls this the most dependable form of courage there is. She says that about Miss Trench. And coming from a woman who has solved dozens of mysteries and seen every kind of human behaviour, that is not a small compliment. The reason I bring this up is that Miss Trench is the character who makes the entire resolution possible. Without her independent list, there is no proof. Mrs. Pemberley's notebook stands alone. The accusation against Mr. Whitten remains. The truth stays buried. One quiet, careful woman with a folded piece of paper in her pocket changed the outcome of the entire story. And she did it not by being loud, not by being dramatic, but by being accurate, and by waiting until accuracy could do its work. I think that is worth remembering, in mysteries and in life. Now, let me summarise the 5 clues that were hiding in plain sight throughout this story. Clue number 1, the timing. The accusation was made at the moment of maximum audience attention. That is calculation, not outrage. Clue number 2, the destroyed record. The original working sheet was conveniently smudged and replaced by a clean copy that only Mrs. Pemberley could verify. Clue number 3, the brooch. It established a 6-year grudge between Mrs. Pemberley and Mrs. Norwood. A grudge strong enough to serve as secondary motive for directing blame. Clue number 4, the laughter during the cricket match. When young Alderton hit his 6 and everyone laughed, that was the moment of distraction. The moment Mrs. Pemberley was at the lemonade table and then was not. The box was opened during those few seconds of collective inattention. Clue number 5, the scratches on the lock. The box showed marks from a duplicate key, not the original committee key, inserted while the box was lying flat on the lemonade table, at the exact height and angle that matched. Every single one of these clues was given to you in the text. Nothing was hidden, nothing was cheated. The misdirection worked, because you were looking where the story told you to look, at Mr. Whitten, at Mrs. Norwood's hamper, instead of where Miss Marple was looking, which was at the accuser herself. There is a beautiful line near the end of this story. Miss Marple reflects that a village resembles a well-kept garden, more closely than most people ever suppose. What matters most is not what flourishes openly. It is what was planted too close, what has been moved deliberately apart, and what sends out roots under the surface where no one is expected to look. That is not just a description of St. Mary Mead. That is a description of how great mysteries work. The truth is never hidden in the locked room or the secret passage. It is hidden in the ordinary, in a notebook, in the timing of an announcement, in a brooch worn on a summer afternoon. And that is what makes Miss Marple the most quietly brilliant detective in all of fiction. She does not need a magnifying glass. She needs only patience, attention, and a lifetime of understanding that people are, in the end, remarkably consistent in their weaknesses. If this analysis helped you see the story in a new way, hit the subscribe button and leave a comment telling me, did you spot Mrs. Pemberley before Miss Marple revealed her? Or did the misdirection get you too? And tell me, did you guess right when I asked you to pause? I read every single comment, and I love seeing how different people read the same clues. Until next time, stay curious, stay sharp, and remember, the most dangerous person in any room is usually the one holding the notebook,